Today's tutor, Sarah Reeve, took part in Portrait Artist of the Year in 2023, producing a bold yet intimate portrait of award-winning businesswoman Vanessa Kingori, who was a big fan of the painting.
I'm going to go for Sarah's.
Oh, amazing, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. It means so much, thank you.
As were we judges.
Sarah Reeve.
Which earned her a place in the semi-final. There, she upped her game with a painting of former Spice Girl Emma Bunton.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home, exactly.
Love it.
And charmed her with a finished portrait.
I love the colours you've used, the bright pink behind instead of the red, actually. It is very me.
Sarah boldly layers her oils straight onto the canvas.
It's just colouring in. What could possibly go wrong?
Which is why she's the perfect tutor for today's masterclass, painting wet on wet.
Today we're going to be looking at Alla Prima painting. You might wonder what Alla Prima is. It's an Italian term that technically means at the first, but it's usually applied for when we're doing a painting all in one setting. So we're sort of sitting and doing the whole painting from start to finish, usually in a fixed time frame. It's also known as wet on wet painting, also known as direct painting. So there's a lot of different terms, but it's dead easy, and we're going to break it down into simple steps today. So we're going to get started on our first stage, the ground, and I can do that really simply. We're going to get our solvent, a nice big brush. This is just a fairly standard decorator's brush. I don't want you to soak the brush completely in your solvent, but just enough just to kind of dip it in and get a little bit onto your palette. I'm using a nice glass palette here. These are my favourite. I absolutely love them. It's actually just a shelf out of a fridge. So a top tip, if you need a nice glass palette, go and find a fridge and get one of the shelves out of it. So I've chosen a really thin wash of burnt umber and our solvent. Burnt umber is great because it's got a kind of cool, undertone, which is really what I'm trying to match to my model's skin tone. Now, as you can see, I'm being really quick here. I'm not being too precise. I'm not too worried about the marks that I'm making. I'm just trying to knock back some of this white that we've got, just to make it a little bit more interesting for us to start building our underpainting on. So I'm just keeping the mix really nice and light. Might need to make a little bit more. And just covering it up. And I'm also using a bit of cloth just to sort of knock it back. So great, I'm quite happy with that. It's pretty rough. That might be the finest piece of work I do all day today, but that's all right, we'll keep going. So I'm going to be doing our underpainting now, which will mean I'm going to swap my brushes out. And I kind of call it my sketching brush. I just find with an Alla Prima painting, it's better to start with your paint right from the start because you're sort of beginning to think in painterly marks. So that's why these little scruffy brushes, it's not going to allow us to be too perfect, but it will mean we can start mapping in the face and giving ourselves a sort of tonal map of where we're then going to be able to build colour on in the next step. So I'm going to start with my underpainting now. And really, this is just a case of mapping in the face. I'm working here from a fantastic reference photograph. And what I like to do when I start off is I really try and get the kind of main points of the figure, of the face, plotted out onto my paper or my canvas. So that's all I'm doing here is just marking key areas. But can you see I'm keeping it really light, so at no point have I gone in with anything too dark. So I really do love Alla Prima, and I would really recommend that you give this a go if you're beginning to sort of learn how to use oil paint. I was sort of taught myself how to use oil paint during lockdown with the Portrait Artist of the Week that was happening on social media, and it was great. It was a really good opportunity to paint along and to paint some celebrities, and it just gave me really great inspiration to keep trying. And I was doing each one of those in that Alla Prima technique. I had to work at my dining room table and with my son homeschooling at one end whilst I was down the other end painting. And it's just great because I had to resolve a painting in one sitting, which is what we're doing today. So it's really good to set yourself a parameter, and it's a way of just sort of simply getting some steps in place to be able to resolve a painting. So I'm just working my way around the reference here and trying to get some key shapes in and just really exploring the face here. Not making anything too definite at this stage, keeping the marks really light and exploratory, and keeping that mix of solvent really thin as well, so giving ourselves somewhere to go. So the photograph that we're using here, a fantastic model, professional model called Nomi, who I've worked from in life as well. It's a great reference, and it's interesting about how you're drawn to certain references or certain photographs or certain models. And I really love this reference. It's a strong position, it's a strong sort of angle of the head. It's quite a challenging angle because she's slightly up and to the side. So it's going to give me a few challenges while I need to look really carefully at these lines here. But I also love that bold orange that we've got there and the contrast between that and her hair. And she's kind of got some cool little touches. I'm liking the tattoo. I'm really enjoying the kind of little nose ring. As an artist, you can choose to take that and respond to it. You can choose to include it or not include it. But for me, it gives it a little quirky touch, which I think will add a bit of character and personality to this painting. OK, so there's a number of things that I'd just like to sort of point out to make sure you don't forget. Something I see that's quite common is that people often forget about necks and shoulders. So this is quite important, otherwise you end up with a sort of floating head that looks like it might just roll down a hill. So don't forget, even if it's just simple lines, it doesn't need to be anything more than just an observed angle on a neck or a shoulder. Don't forget to give your portrait something to sit on, OK? Almost as if we were like a sort of a bust of someone that we need to have that base. It will just put it into context. As this underpainting is beginning to sort of shape up, you can see I've still kept it pretty light. The mix is still pretty thin. We're sort of working, I would compare it a bit to a sort of disappointing squash that you might get around your nan's house. That's the sort of mix that we're going for, OK? Because we're going to be putting a lot darker paints on, so give yourself somewhere to go. But at the moment, this is looking, I'm feeling fairly happy with where the angles are. There's some really strong lines here that I'm observing. I just want to try and make sure that I've got the angles coming in right. I wanted to just quickly stop and talk about likeness versus not likeness. It's a tricky thing, and I know with portraits we always want things to look like the person that we're painting. But when you're starting out, just be really kind to yourselves, because I think people really beat themselves up by going, oh, but it doesn't look like the person. Just try and get it to look like a person. If you're doing that, we're in the right ballpark, OK? So we're just kind of observing, responding, and continually just slightly adjusting marks. So if you're interested in likeness, get your drawing skills up to speed, and you'll only do that by just putting in the time to practice and practice. I'm just in the final stages of this underpainting now, and I'm just blocking in a little bit of the darkest tone that I can see, just to give myself a little clue when I do start applying a bit more colour. But I think I'm pretty sure, yeah, I think that'll do. Moving on to the next stage now, the colours. Basically a combination of just 4 different colours: titanium white, yellow ochre, cad red, and ivory black. So I'm just going to choose a brush. I'm going to go for a larger brush now to start off with, because it's really all about blocking as much colour as you can in, looking at your big shapes and the sort of shapes, if you were to really squint, what you were to see first. But I'm going to go in with a combination of the mid-tones, well, start from dark first. So we're going to start with the darkest tones first and work our way up to the lightest tones. So I'm now just going to start blocking them in with a big brush, use a bit of solvent just to keep the paint moving. So don't soak it. We don't want a sort of really thin mix. We just want enough just to be able to get the paint down at this stage into the areas that we've sort of identified. What I'm doing now is I'm just blocking in the largest areas of kind of mid-tone or dark colour that I can see. I'm observing some sort of darker green and purple shadows and tones underneath Nomi's chin around her neck area, which will really kind of create the sort of frame for the colours that I'm about to put in the centre or more around her face. The paint does look a bit strange when you're in these kind of halfway points, but you have to sort of slightly trust the process. You have to trust that your observation of these things will pay dividends in the end. So commit to it. If you see purple, put a purpley tone down, and once you've got everything down, the colours will start to sort of sit properly. So just work your way through and put as much kind of observation as you can. Now, I've gone for some quite contrasted tones here, very bright, very dark, and some quite sort of like slightly more sludgy flesh tones. But it's good. It's going to give us a good base to work with. So I really enjoy using these boingy synthetic brushes. They've got a really nice bounce to them, if you see here. And when you're working Alla Prima, it's nice. You can place the paint quite decisively. So when we're working wet in wet and the paint starts getting thicker, these are going to come in really handy. They're a very versatile brush. They're called short flats or brights. You can use all sorts of brushes. Often people use hog hair brushes with Alla Prima, which gives them quite nice texture. But I personally quite enjoy that sort of, that sort of synthetic, cleaner look. So it sort of seems to suit the way that I apply the paint. So you can see I'm sort of working my way around Nomi's face here and sort of pushing and pulling some of the shadows that I see. So that I've gone for the big shapes, the big dark shapes or the big colourful shapes, but I'm also slightly looking. There's not actually a huge amount of definition here on Nomi's face. It's quite some large areas of sort of similar tone. So I'm just kind of going into the details that I can see. And although these are dark, people have a tendency to do eyebrows exactly the same colour as hair. But if you look, they're not actually as dark as the hair. So I've kind of changed the tone and the colour of them slightly. So I really like painting with strong colour, and that is something that tends to come out in my work. I love artists who work with a muted palette, but it tends to be not what comes out of my brush. So what I like to do on these stages is just put in a few kind of colour notes. So something that I might have seen. So I often find a bit of purple under the eye, purple and greens. These sort of little colour notes would just be enough for me to kind of have a clue of where I go. And I also am a really big fan of pink. I really love pink across the cheeks, the nose, the chin, just somewhere that I can just put. Now, it looks quite bright, but I just want it to be there, just to sit as a sort of colour note, so that when I'm kind of coming to apply my larger tones of colour, that I've just got this kind of indication of where I want these kind of sections to sit. So we're probably about the halfway stage now of our Alla Prima painting, and I like to call this like the really weird phase. So this is where you have to kind of trust the process. Because we're sort of tiling colour, we're putting colour in various places, this is the way that I tend to work, it's looking a little bit crazy, and you need to sort of just trust that we're continuing to go with our observations. Something that I notice a lot of people do often is leave things that we're a bit scared of painting, or something that's, particularly if it's very important to us, like eyes, right to the last minute. Don't be afraid of going in with the eyes and starting to just put down the loose shapes. We're still keeping it loose, but I've moved down to a slightly smaller brush now just to get a little bit more detail. So we've got to the stage now where we've pretty much blocked in most of the dark and the medium tones and the light tones and where I really want the colour. So in an Alla Prima painting, this is something that we want to do. We want to get as much paint as we can in one sitting. So, so we've got our first sort of stage done now, and now we're going into the kind of wet in wet principle. So I've already got paint here, and I'm now going to be applying paint onto the surface as I'm going. So I really like these synthetic brushes because you can kind of place the paint quite decisively. It's not dragging, it's being quite decisive about where I'm choosing to put the paint, and I'm not mixing the paint on the face. I'm using maybe a sort of gradient tone between these two to maybe blend it down a little bit, but I'm not overworking the paint on the surface of my painting. If you do that, you can find yourself down a slightly muddy path. This is not good. You might have heard about mud and oil painting before, and people are like, ah, it's really muddy. Mud really with oil painting just means that you've got too many pigments mixed together so that the light can't pass through the pigments, and you're losing a bit of that kind of translucency and transparency that oil paint can reflect back to you. We're trying to avoid that, and really the best way to do that is to use the right sort of brush, but also just to be decisive about the marks that you're making. So really think about what you're doing, especially when you're in this stage of wet in wet. So you can adjust everything. Everything is up for grabs, nothing is fixed, but just do it sort of decisively. So can you see here, I'm not overworking anything. I'm just placing down the colour as I'm observing it here with my model, and just softening some of those tiled edges that I put down. Okay, so we're beginning to bring this to a sort of resolution, and remember, that's our goal today. It's not that we're sort of finishing on an exhibition-ready portrait. We are just doing a study all in one sitting, but we're just a little bit more attention to detail here on the eyes. I'm just using some tones that I can notice here around Nomi's eye, just to sort of draw a bit of attention and make us feel like there's a person there. So remember, the whites of eyes are not white. That's going to be the biggest tip you can take home from this. The actual white of an eye, if you hold it next to a piece of paper, is not white, OK? So looking at our reference image here of Nomi's lovely eyes, they're really great big eyes to express. You can see that there are different tones on either side. So this is lighter here than it is there. So make sure you reflect that in your painting, because it will come across better than if you just put a white in both sides of equal tone. It's always going to be dark underneath the lid, because you've got that shadow of the eyelid that's coming down. So those little touches are going to make your eye feel a lot more realistic. I also quite enjoy pushing this bit here. Feels a bit crazy, but that is where the blood flow is going into the eye. So you can just add a little bit of a nudge there, and it actually reads quite nicely. So yeah, pay a bit of attention to your eyes, it'll be worth it. OK, so I just want to put some finishing touches now onto the painting. As you can see, she's got these really fabulous little dots. It's like a little makeup trick. So I'm just going to add them in. I'm not going to put them in black so much, but I just want them just to be there, just to sit underneath the pupil. I don't want things to look too precious. I might just slightly blot it. OK, same with the highlights in the eyes. It's nice that I do quite like a highlight in an eye. It gives it a little bit of a shape. but I've not gone in with white. I've gone in with a sort of off-white, so something a bit beige, just so it doesn't really dominate the whole painting. OK, so just giving a bit of texture there. Pop a highlight on the nose. But can you see these are the last things I'm doing? I'm not kind of going mad and putting them in right at the start. And then also a highlight here on the nose ring. So just to kind of really make that step out. Don't need a lot more than that, just enough just to kind of give an indication. And then we're going to go back in, so remember I spoke about this tattoo. So I quite enjoy keeping these sections here quite abstract. I think there's something that can be work quite nicely. Personally, I don't need to go into too much detail for that. It just needs to be that base to that face that we were talking about earlier. So, so when it comes to doing the tattoo, this is actually almost, because we use quite a thin layer of solvent, it's quite dry already, so I'm just going to simplify, and that is kind of our job as painters, is just to add a sort of simple tone. So it's going to be a lot easier for me than actually working out what the talented tattoo artist who did this did, and it just adds a nice kind of little unique flourish to something to the end of this painting, but it gives me enough information. If I were to do another painting, we'd have something to work on. I'm just having a bit of fun with it, implying some sort of geometric shape so that I can feel like there is a tattoo happening. But this is your choice as an artist, so you can choose to make these decisions and include information like this, or you can choose to not. I've chosen to leave some unfinished bits here to imply a study, but other than that, I think as Alla Prima paintings go, I'm pretty happy with that. So give Alla Prima painting a go. It'll teach you to be really efficient with your mark making, with your colour, and it will help you really to embrace unpredictability. So it's going to be really important for your practice, whether you're starting out or whether you're a bit more experienced. But yeah, give it a go.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv.